Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing Balmy Days in a 15 plus 10 game on chess.com. Alright, so originally I was just trying to record a standard game, but I was not able to find an opponent. I think my rating on chess.com got adjusted upwards because I played in the Pro Chess League a few months ago, because I did not have this 2448 standard rating a while ago. I think it was sub 2000, but based on my participation in the Pro Chess League, they must have made all those players come up to their FIDE rating, which that was my FIDE rating at the time of the first round of the Pro Chess League. So as a result, I was not able to find an opponent in my rating range. I was just sitting there waiting for 20, 30 minutes looking for a challenge. So now I'm playing Balmy Days. I'm just going to make this a climbing the rating ladder game. I'm playing the Joko piano here, and Balmy Days played d6. I don't think this is the best move. I think black should play knight f6 or bishop c5 instead. And let me just think about how I'm going to react, because if black doesn't play one of those two moves on the previous move, I have more freedom. So I'm thinking the immediate d4 is the way to go. This is what I usually advocate, especially in the Italian game. And my opponent takes on d4. Okay, I'm going to take with the knight. And presuming that he takes back, take with the queen. And even though my queen is in the center, it's hard for black to harass it because it's not easy for black to do that with another piece. Black could play c5 and look to hit the queen, but that would create a hole on d5. So this queen e7 move, I greatly dislike. I think that's a bad move by my opponent because it blocks in the bishop unnecessarily. Black is not attacking my e-pawn. Well, they are attacking my e-pawn technically, but it's defended by my queen. So that's of no concern to me. So I'd like to open the position right away. I feel like I have a development advantage already. I have two pieces out to black's one. And black's king might be sticking around in the center. However, it's not easy to open the position initially. So knight c3 or castles on the king side are my candidate moves here. Not too many other moves I'm considering. I'm slightly leaning towards knight c3 just because the threat of knight d5 looks like it could cause some inconvenience to black. So yeah, let's go ahead and play this. And this is a longer game, so 15 minutes with a 10-second increment. This is the minimum time control that I've often recommended to those of you who are really looking to improve in your online games. I don't think you should play bullet or blitz if you're really trying to get better. I think these longer games are the way to go. So queen e5. All right, so black moves the queen again. However, offering a queen trade might increase the margin of safety for black. If I were to take, I could try to attack the c7 pawn right away, something like knight b5, but it seems to me like black is able to defend against that threat. Maybe just bishop d6. Holding c7. I could play knight takes d6 then, c takes. I'm probably slightly better there. But my instinct says just hold on to the queen. Don't trade queens yet. I could also maybe play bishop e3 if I wanted to offer a queen trade that furthers my development too, helps me coordinate. Let black take on d4, and then my bishop will take up residence on this nice square. That's also an intriguing possibility. So queen takes e5, bishop e3, or some queen move like queen d3. Those are my options. There's almost nothing else because my queen is under attack. So again, just looking at that trade idea, and then knight b5, because that is kind of a forcing line. I don't like the look of it, though. Maybe even bishop b4 check then is playable for black. If I'm going to agree to the queen trade, I like the bishop e3 move more, because bishop e3 just seems to give black some development issues after the trade on d4. Yeah, let's play that. It's possible that backing the queen up was also okay too if I wanted to keep pieces on the board. And black instantly takes, so this is something you can try to do when your opponent is playing very quick. You can try to lure them into trades that might be favorable for you. Okay, so bishop e6, black offering a swap of the bishops. I could take, black will take with her pawn, and then maybe e5 to come. Knight d5 is a move I'm looking at, because that attacks c7, although I think black could just castle out of it. No big deal. Maybe bishop b3. Bishop b3 is a nice little move, because then if black were to take, I can take with my a pawn and try to open the file towards that pawn on a7. And I bet if I play bishop b3, that black will take. Just a hunch, but I think it's an almost guarantee that black is just trying to chop pieces here. Maybe not in hopes of making a draw or anything, but based on how black has been playing thus far, they've agreed to almost every trade that I propose. So there you go. Bishop takes b3. And now, by playing a takes, black experiences some pressure on this pawn. It's more difficult for black to castle queenside now. Probably black should play something like a6. I'm fully mobilized. Okay, knight f6. Now, what are my candidate moves here? I've already been mentioning candidate moves a lot. Candidate moves are, as the name suggests, just the moves that you're considering in a position. And you should always be looking at your forcing moves, your checks and your captures, and also your major threats, like attacking your opponent's queen or threatening a checkmate in one. But you also want to have moves beyond that, too, if the forcing moves are not clearly good. So here, a couple forcing moves. Bishop takes knight on f6. Also, I could capture on a7. Okay, so those are the first moves I'm going to analyze. Bishop takes f6 catches my eye immediately because after pawn takes f6, we saddle black with double isolated f-pawns. And I could try to exploit them by playing knight d5. So knight d5 hits c7 and also f6. That's a fork. And black, at minimum, I think is going to lose a pawn. Even if black castles on the queen side, I don't even have to take on f6. I could even play a move like rook takes a7 there. However, I am noticing bishop takes f6, g takes f6, knight d5. There is king d8. I don't know that black would find that move. Not that I'm hoping to play hope chess, but king d8 is less natural, I suppose, than castles or maybe a move like rook c8. But the idea there would be if knight takes f6, then bishop g7, and if my knight were to move, the pawn on b2 would hang. So bishop takes f6 looks promising strategically. I don't think it wins a pawn, but I could play that resulting position. Bishop takes f6, g takes f6, knight d5, king d8, and then maybe maneuver to control the f5 square. I still like my position quite a bit. So let's put that to the side for a second. I'm not going to pursue it any further because I've already drawn a mini conclusion. What about the capture on a7? The problem with the capture on a7, whether I start with rook takes or bishop takes, is that my bishop may get trapped after a subsequent b6. This is a motif you have to know about, but a bishop taking a rook pawn like that can often just get entombed if your opponent pushes their knight pawn one square. So say I play rook takes a7, black plays rook takes a7 in reply, bishop takes a7, b6. And even though black doesn't have a convenient way to win the bishop yet, it is out of play there, and the onus would be on me to get it out. So I don't like that. And same with bishop takes a7, the b6 move. Maybe tactically I can somehow make it work. Again, black is a few moves away from being able to exploit it, but I know from experience trying to seize that rook pawn, it's often more trouble than it's worth. So I think I'm going to go with bishop takes f6 and followed by knight d5. And if black finds king d8, then so be it. I'll probably have to settle for some sort of strategic edge, at least I hope. But it looks like the best move. I don't think I want to pass up the opportunity to take on f6, because if I don't play this now, black will go bishop e7, and black might be okay. One other move that I probably should consider, knight b5. Knight b5, hitting c7. And again, black doesn't want to castle because they would just lose a7. Knight b5 adds another attacker to a7 too. So knight b5, let's say king d7. Maybe I can take on a7 there. But again, even if I take with the knight, I feel like it's more trouble than it's worth. Black could even play something like c6, and the knight becomes hard to maintain there. They can't retreat back to b5. So you know what? I've spent enough time. I think I'm just going to play bishop takes f6. So my opponent's killing me on the clock right now, but I do like my position. Were I not commenting, I hope I would have at least 10 minutes or so by now. But this is one of the benefits of playing these longer games of 15 plus 10, is that I can afford to think a little bit longer. All right, so now let's play our intended move real quickly here, knight d5. And black needs to come up with king d8. If they don't play king d8, black's going to be clearly worse. So let's see what my opponent does. Yeah, up until this point, you can see that these little bars here and the associated numbers, that's the time usage per move. You can see that my opponent has spent more than 10 seconds only on one move so far. That was queen e5 on move 7. Otherwise, black has been playing almost instant. So I do think it's good that Balmy Days is slowing down now. That's smart. Maybe they recognize that the position is becoming sharp. Okay, so king d7. That didn't bother me because I can take on f6 with check now. So let's go ahead and do that. Not many other moves to look at there. c7 was covered. a7 is covered. Knight b6 wasn't working. So let's just cash in. Now my knight's under attack. I think I'm going to pull it back to d5. Nice centralized square. Threatening knight takes c7. And I think black has to pull the king back to d7, which black does. Okay, good decision there. But now I've bagged a pawn. I think it's high time I do something with my king and connect my rooks. So I'm thinking just castle short. Could also castle long, but I kind of like my rook on the a file. I think that causes some problems for black there. So yeah, let's just castle. Bishop g7. So when your opponent has a fianchettoed bishop, or really any bishop on a strong diagonal, it's good if you can put two pawns connected on the same diagonal as that bishop. So here I'm going to play c3. That blunts the bishop. We're putting pawns on the same diagonal, trying to reduce its influence. That may be counterintuitive for some of you because you might think that you should try to clear the diagonal in its entirety, right? So that the bishop doesn't have any squares to operate on. But that's a mistake. You want to try to fight back against your opponent's strong bishop as much as possible, especially by using your pawns. Okay, so c6 attacks my knight. I need to move it. Knight e3 is the move I like because then the knight could be bound for the f5 square. That's a useful outpost. And knight f5 is a stable square in that black's pawns do not exist anymore on the e and the g files. So if I get my knight to f5, there's no pawn on either of those files that can come up to either e6 or g6 to harass it. Nor does black possess the right color bishop to offer a trade for that knight once it lands on f5. Black would need a light square bishop to do that. So barring black trading one of their rooks for my knight, that knight is going to be looking nice and secure on this square. And now I get to do it with tempo on the bishop. Bishop's under fire. The d6 pawn could be under attack. Now we see the germ of a plan for me. I can bring my rook over to d1, rook f d1, employ this rook, and fire away at this d6 pawn. That's looking quite nice. So let's go ahead and do that. And black put the bishop all the way back on f8. That disrupts black's rook coordination. So now these rooks are not speaking with each other anymore. Knight takes d6 is now a threat. The idea there is even though I'd be giving up my knight, bishop takes d6, I can follow with pawn to e5. And I will regain the piece and win another pawn in that transaction. So I'll actually be up 2 pawns. So knight takes d6, forcing move, got to look at it. Bishop takes d6, e5. And I don't think there's any move there that black can play that's going to ensure that they don't lose the pawn. They're going to have to give one of these pawns and be down 2 pawns. Just checking to make sure that the rook endgames are okay for me. It's a good thing to do. Knight takes d6, bishop takes d6, e5. Let's say black plays something like rook a d8. Rook takes d6 check. Let's say king e7 or king c7. I think they're similar. I can double up my rooks. I'm more than willing to trade the rooks. I am up 2 pawns, so any further simplifications should benefit me. Yeah, it's looking nice. I could also play e5 if I wanted, but I kind of dismissed e5 because on e5, black gets the option of playing d5 and passing up my pawn. I could continue with c4 there maybe, but then king e6, I don't like that line as much. Black would be attacking my knight and my pawn. So I'm going to go ahead and take just a temporary sacrifice, the intention of forcing that pawn up to e5 and regaining the material. So, looking like a difficult position for my opponent. And we got to recognize the enormous rating difference, right? So the point of this series is to try to show you the various play at the different rating levels in chess. And here I'm playing a player who's much lower rated than me. And I give Balmy Days credit. This player's hanging around. They haven't blundered a piece. They have lost a couple pawns. but by and large, Balmy Days is making it a good game. The thing I don't like about Balmy Days' play is not so much the moves, but their time management. This thing that I harp on all the time. So currently, Balmy Days has more time than they started with. We started with 15 minutes per side, 10-second increment. And it's just so hard to play a good game if you're not willing to invest that time and use the allotment that you began with. So, okay, King C7. This is one of the lines I was looking at, except I was saying Rook on D8, but it's going to be similar. My pawn on E5 is under attack. Got to watch out for those loose pawns and pieces. I like the look of just F4. So supporting E5. Could also maybe try to go after Black's F-pawn, but I feel like this F-pawn is going to be perpetually weak. Whereas my E-pawn is pretty strong. You see how it supports my Rook on D6, so I don't want Black to easily undermine that pawn. So let's just play F4. Okay, Black's offering a trade. And I mentioned before, I am not minding trades because I am ahead in material. So I can take right away, or I can play Rook AD1 and just double up. And based on how Black has been playing so far, I think it's almost a guarantee that Black's going to take on D6, and I can take with my other Rook. I kind of want to play that move just to test this theory. But taking on E6 also looks very good, I gotta say. The only thing is, if I play Rook D1, I kind of wonder if Black will change their mind and play Rook E7 and just guard the 7th rank, which is probably the best move. But, I mean, both moves are good, don't get me wrong. Just trying to figure out which one is going to give me the best chances of winning this game cleanly. I think Rook takes E6. Yeah, let's play Rook takes E6. And then we're going to take the D file. So Black's going to take back, and we'll go here. Now, Black should definitely not play Rook D8. Even though I have control of this nice and only truly open file in the position, Rook D8 is a kiss of death for Black. You can't go into a pawn endgame when you're 2 pawns down like that. Okay, so Balmy Days plays B5 instead. Now I'm thinking about just sticking the Rook on D6, where the other Rook just was. Attack the E6 pawn. That's going to obligate Black to defend it somehow. Probably Rook E8, the only move. Maybe Rook F8 first, but yeah, Rook E8, and then I can go about trying to make a pass pawn over here. Before I do that, I'm kind of considering the move B4, just because that stops any A5 or C5 business. Don't think that move is strictly necessary, but you know what? I like it a lot, because maybe Black could try to play A5, A4, and create some sort of trouble on the queen side. And there's absolutely no rush here. The pawns that I'm up on the king side are not going anywhere yet, but once I start bringing my king up and push G4, like let's say I get my king on E4, I push G4 and then F5, they're going to make their presence felt. So I can afford to play the move B4 just as a restriction move and await further developments. The move king to B6 does not help Black at all because C5 is not threatened, the pawn is pinned. And if king B6 followed by A5, I can just take the pawn, and after king takes A5, rook takes C6. Feel like I've been talking a lot so far, pretty much nonstop, but that's mostly because my opponent's been playing very quick. Okay, H5. So now I can just bring my king up, as I was saying. Probably no need to do anything else, anything fancier than that. Okay, king up here. Let's just play king F3. Now my plan is just to get G4 in. Probably with the help of my H-pawn, though. There's other ways to play this too, but I don't see a defense to say just G3, H3, and then G4. And why am I playing G3 first as opposed to just H3? Well, my thinking is if I play H3, Black might play H4 themselves, and then if I were to play G4 at that point, after takes, I have an isolated H-pawn and an isolated F-pawn. I think that's also completely winning, but maybe I don't even have to entertain that possibility. Yeah, there's just so many good possibilities here. I think even G3 followed by F5 is going to win pretty quick too. So let's just play G3. Nice move to connect all my pawns too. That's a crowded diagonal right there. h2 to c7. Yeah, and black's just waiting here. So if I wanted h3, g4, take, maybe king up, and then f5 or g5. Could also play f5, and then after takes, king f4. That should do the trick quite easily as well. Yeah, I like the easy plan. Let's go with h3. Some might say I'm proceeding at a glacial pace here, but with black's last few moves, it's clear that black has nothing to do. He's just shuffling the king back and forth and awaiting developments, because we already laid that groundwork with our rook on d6 tying down black's rook to e6, and the b pawn tying up the a and the c pawns. So we can advance our pawns as harmoniously as we like. Take. Rook e7, okay. So I don't want to play f5 here, because after f5 takes, my e pawn would be hanging. So maybe I preface this with king e4. King e4 followed by f5. I think that's simplest. Black can play rook g7, try to take my pawn on g4, but I might be willing to trade that. Rook takes e6, rook takes g4, and I get these two connected pawns. I could also just play g5. But no, instead I'm finally going to be able to play this f5 move. Take with the pawn, keep the pawns connected. f6 coming next. Okay, so king takes d6 is not a threat, because even though my e-pawn is pinned, that's just not legal by the laws of chess for black to take when black's king would be under attack by my pawn. So important to note that. I've sometimes thought about that in games. Weird situations where a king could take a piece that looks pinned, but it's in fact not legal. Okay, rook here. I think I'm just going to saunter up with my king. Don't want to play e6 yet because of rook takes f6. That just complicates things. I could probably even just play e7 there. But king f5. And assuming black makes another king move, I was going to play e6 after that. Black plays this instead, so I think just coming into g6 with the king makes a great deal of sense. Attack the rook. The rook could come down to the second rank, but my pawns are so far advanced that black doesn't have time to gobble my b2 pawn or the c3 pawn or anything like that. So f7. Now the rook is completely tied to the 8th rank for fear of f8 queen. And next I can play king g7. Just attack the rook. And this will be all she wrote. Free to advance the pawn. Black's king is not attacking the rook anymore. Let's just back the rook off. Push through, make a queen, and then checkmate. Okay. And Balmy Days resigned. Just told my opponent thanks for the game. Seemed like a nice guy. I see you said hi at the beginning of the game. I didn't see that. So, going back for a second here. We're going to analyze this game in a second, but I do want to reiterate the time usage thing. Those of you who watch my videos, especially these climbing the rating ladder videos and my standard videos, kind of go hand in hand. I just always talk about time usage because it's the one thing I see at the lower rating levels, just across the board, even higher rating levels. Like when I'm playing 2000 on Lichess in classical, it's shocking how often people just don't use their time. So White ended this game with more time than they originally started with. And I know there's the 10-second increment. I know that black was pretty helpless at the end, so they were just playing quick moves. But you can't hope to play a good game. You're not going to reach your full potential or anything close to it if you're moving that fast. And several big decisions for black, especially involving these trades, were made almost instantly. And it was almost like a tell in poker or something. I was able to pick up on that. Remember here on move 10 where I said, I bet if I play bishop b3, black's just going to take it right away. And of course they did. But instructive game, let's go back and take a look at it. So e4. For most of you, and the majority of you are below 2,000 who are watching these videos, it makes sense to master e4 before going on to anything else as white. I'm definitely a believer in that philosophy. Masters from the past have often said that you need to master the open games before moving on to the closed games, and the open games are the type of games that result after e4. This enables the quickest development because you're opening the bishop and the queen. And this line that we played into, the Italian game, bishop c4 on move 3, I think is another opening that you want to master. Certainly if you're below, let's say, 1200. Because bishop c4 pressurizes f7 immediately. And this leads to some principled lines that I think will just benefit you to know throughout your chess career. Even I now, especially as a chess teacher, really, I often come across games in the Italian game played by my students or just other random games that I see, and I even think back to the lines that I learned when I was a kid. So bishop c4. So the two acceptable moves here, two most common moves, I should say, because there is one other line that's, I think, pretty okay for black, which is bishop e7. But knight f6 and bishop c5 are the normal moves. Knight f6 is the two knights defense. Black puts pressure on e4. And bishop c5 is the Gioco piano. Bishop c5 holds up white's attempts to play d4 and expand in the center. Black's following suit, developing their bishop as well. Those are the two best moves. But as I said, bishop e7 on move 3. This is the Hungarian defense. This is also not bad. I'd recommend reacting with d4, though, if you're white. d6 is played. You can find many, many instances of d6 in the database if you were to look this up. But I think it's a suboptimal move because it does block the bishop. It's more passive. I don't think there's a truly compelling reason to block the bishop from reaching c5. And since black doesn't have the bishop on c5 and black is not hitting my e4 pawn, I figure just advance in the center, d4. Try to knock out black's pawn on e5. Black took with the knight. Pawn takes is probably a bit more flexible because after knight takes, black would not be forced to take with the knight necessarily. So knight takes d4, we get this trade. Now I was saying that even though my queen is out here in the center, it's not so easy for black to attack it because if c5 is played, this tends to amount to just a weakening of the position. Queen back to d3, and the d5 square is tough for black to contest. You could imagine if white were able to sit a knight here, black would have to try to trade for it with one of their pieces because this pawn on d6 is backward. This phenomenon actually occurred in the game when I was talking about the knight on f5, but black has no pawn that could come up to e6 or c6 remaining, so sticking a knight on d5 would be a long-term goal for white, a good long-term goal. One thing I really hate about chess.com is, that sounds kind of harsh, but one thing that chess.com can improve on is when you restore a move, it should take you back to the previous position that you were looking at. So every time I try to restore it, it goes to the end of the game, which is pretty annoying. They need to make that more seamless somehow. So after queen takes d4, so here black played queen e7, and again, notice the time usage. Do you guys even see that? Yeah, you can, probably just barely. But so black spent 1.8 seconds on this move, queen e7, and it's a bad move. It blocks in the bishop. It doesn't contribute to black's minor piece development. I guess queen e5 is the idea as played by black on the next move, but it would take a lot to convince me that this is a good move. Black needs to continue with their development somehow. So a move like knight f6, I think, comes to mind. Just bring the knight out. Don't want to be playing queen moves at the expense of the development of your other pieces, and especially queen moves that block in your minor piece development. So I play knight c3, queen e5. And here, I don't know if I played the right move. So I was mentioning my candidates. Queen takes e5, bishop e3, and queen d3, just avoiding the queen trade. I will say, sometimes I'm tempted in these types of situations against lower rated players because there is a conception that, or a perception that you want to keep as much material on the board as possible when playing lower rated players because you have the best chances to beat them there. Keep resources on board, outplay them in complicated positions. Don't let them get to endgames, which I think is true to some extent. And maybe if this were a simul game or something, and my goal was just to beat the person as fast as possible, I might play queen d3 and try to keep queens on board, but bishop e3 seemed like a good move to me. I like the fact that this helps my coordination and development when black does take. Now I've got 3 minor pieces out to black's none. So even though black gets some safety by trading the queens, I still like my position a lot. So bishop e6. Yeah, and here again, I don't know that I played the best move. So I played bishop b3. I didn't want to take on e6 because I felt like that kind of helped black's position. So after this, black might be able to play e5 coming up. So it wasn't quite in the mood to do that. So bishop b3. And if black doesn't take on b3, I still like my chances because notice that it's hard for black to develop these pieces. If the bishop comes to e7, that runs into bishop takes g7, and I just win the rook in the corner. If knight f6, I might do what I did in the game, which is take and give black those double isolated f-pawns. Strategically, that's nasty for black. So bishop e3 seems like maybe a wise move to put the ball in black's court, try to offer them the chance to take, whereupon I get this asset of the a file. And black did take, and then played knight f6. And here I get the chance to play that bishop takes move. What else comes to mind for black? I think a6 has to be a big priority here, or at least I would think about the a6 move. Because the a-pawn is hanging in so many variations, black just might want to solve that problem immediately. Unfortunately, a6 doesn't contribute to black's development, but maybe there's no way for white to exploit it. If I play knight d5, for instance, now it's possible for black to just castle. I still think white's slightly better in view of the development, but with the queens off the board, it's hard to make use of a clear lead in development. It's usually much easier to do that if the queens are on board because you can create more threats. So I do think a6 is what black should have played there on move 12. Or on, was it move 11, actually. So instead, knight f6. And now I spotted this line, take, knight d5, attacking the 2 undefended pawns. And I think black must play king d8. It's virtually a forced move. King d8 to guard c7. Point being that after knight takes f6, bishop g7, I will lose the pawn on b2 after I move my knight. So I was saying that if king d8 is played, I would probably pivot towards trying to control the f5 square. I might even play knight e3 right away and just try to sink that knight into f5. Because actually the knight is probably going to dominate the bishop. You saw how in the game, once the knight reached the f5 square, it was hard for black to do much with the bishop, and black ended up retreating the bishop from h6 back to f8. So I might do that. I also might just castle here on one side of the board. I could castle kingside like I did in the game. Castle's queenside is also tempting, though, with the king on d8 on the same file as the rook. So I had a backup plan. Even though I was hoping I would win a pawn, I recognized that I wasn't necessarily going to win it if black played correctly by playing king d8, and I still had an idea in mind after that. Instead, though, so after knight d5, king d7, that does guard c7, but now I get to take, now I get to take on f6 with check. Yeah, and the fact that it comes with check means that black is not in time to play bishop g7 and win my b2 pawn. Black has to move their king, and I come back to d5. I'm up a pawn. Black still has issues defending c7 and a7. Black's got a slightly shattered structure here on the king side, weak pawns. And I think my knight also is probably a bit better than the bishop. King here. I just castled. Again, I like that rook on the a file. You could argue that since this is an endgame or a queenless middle game, that castling is not necessary. You might make a case for a move like king e2. But on king e2, I didn't like that black might put a rook on e8 eventually and attack the e4 pawn. I think it's just easier to castle. Even though, theoretically, I do want my king more centralized for the endgame. You can see later on that I started bringing my king up. Bishop g7. I was explaining the importance of having 2 pawns connected, at least 2 pawns connected, on the same diagonal as your opponent's bishop. That's usually a good situation if you can set that up. Try to block the bishop. c6, knight e3. And it's tough for black because they're tied down to some weaknesses. My knight is going to cause black headaches when it jumps into f5. I don't know what I would do here as black because there's just not a lot of hope. I mean, I might start with a move like rook e8, try to put pressure here. Maybe try to advance the A and the B pawns to create some sort of confusion on the queen side, but it's a lost position. The damage has already been done. So bishop h6, knight f5. And this also doesn't help black. I thought that black might go to f4 here, but then I had in mind g3, just trying to chase the bishop. I wouldn't mind putting more pawns on dark squares just to take away the bishop's influence. So bishop here, rook fd1. Notice my rook is the one piece that's not doing anything in the position, probably other than my king. So assigning it to this file and creating a tactical threat in the process is a nice little plan. So here I think black has to move their king. I think they have to play king e6 or king c7, one of the two. Then the knight takes d6 tactic is not going to work out because there will be no pin along the d file. And had this been played, I think I like the look of rook d3. So lifting the rook, which hints at two things. Perhaps doubling up with the rook, or maybe swinging the rook over to f3 or h3 to try to eventually attack these guys. So I may shift from pressuring d6 to going after the other weak pawns. And white's a lot better. It's probably a technical win, but there's still work to be done. Instead, though, black tried to solve the a-pawn issue. Black played a6, but that allowed the knight takes d6 shot. And after it takes, we get e5 in. No way for black to win the pawn back. Black's just going to be down 2 pawns. I just had to make sure here when calculating this line that there was nothing that black could do to try to create confusion. Like I think I was looking at the line here. Rook takes check, king c7. But this rook always coming over ensures that black won't get any counterplay. If you were white in this position, you wouldn't want to trade rooks here because then black's rook is going to get activity. It's going to come into d2. And even though white will still be up 2 pawns, you don't want some sort of situation like the following where, yeah, you're up 2 solid pawns, at least for now, but your rook is tied down to the defense of a pawn. That's always a bad, well, almost always a bad situation in single rook endgames. That's the situation that my opponent found himself in the game when I got my rook into d6 and he had to keep his rook on e8. So I definitely don't want to allow that. That's why right here, should this position arise, I wanted to play this and keep black's remaining rook at bay after the trade. So yeah, as played, I think the rest was pretty self-explanatory. Black played that rook e8 move. I took on d6, supported my pawn. Now it's just about trading if allowed, and then gradually utilizing my 2 extra pawns on the king side, trying to make a pass pawn or 2, and winning the game. Getting the rook into d6 helped a lot, though. Tie down that rook. And I think b4, it is a nice move. It looks a little slow, but there's no rush here. We have black completely under our thumb, so why not just prevent any bit of counterplay that black might have? You know, if I started playing my king up, it is possible for black to do something like a5, a4, and I suppose I could play b4 here, but, you know, I was just envisioning something like this. Maybe black could play rook b8, eventually attack this, and the a-pawn causes more concern than perhaps black's position warrants. So play b4, just prevent that last bit of counterplay. And then we're bringing the king up, so including the king in the endgame, and create the passed pawns. Start pushing. All the while being wary about loose pawns, right? We're not going to get ahead of ourselves. If I had played f5 here, then after takes, the pawn on e5 would be undefended. So even in clearly winning positions, you got to dot your I's and cross your T's. Make sure you got everything defended. Yeah, and these 2 connectors are way too strong, especially with black's king out of play. Okay, so like I said, I think a pretty instructive game. So balmy days, time management left something to be desired. Black avoided the worst of it out of the opening. It could have been a lot worse given the way that black played this, but I would say one thing, along with the time management, that this player might want to take into consideration is not being so agreeable to trades. Virtually every trade that black made in this game benefited me somehow, if we just quickly go back through those. So when black took twice on d4, I got my queen to a strong outpost. When black took on d4, I had my bishop nicely poised here. When black played bishop takes b3, I was able to take with my pawn. Even though I get doubled pawns here, the pressure down the a file more than compensates for that. So want to watch that. You always want to make sure that trades are at least equal for you, or ideally you get some sort of advantage out of every trade you're making in a chess game. All right, anyways, let me know if you have any questions on this game, climbing the rating ladder, and we'll see who I play next in this series. It's been a while, but I like making these videos, so stay tuned. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Bye.